So, in anticipation of the upcoming Halloween season, I really wanted to stretch my bookbinding skills that I've only very recently started to develop. So I knew I wanted to do something different and something odd and creepy for the Halloween season. I went through a bunch of different ideas, from Grimm's fairy tales to Bram Stoker's Dracula, but ultimately I landed on the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft. Because the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft were published so long ago, they're all in the public domain now, and you can find them for free, the complete works, all for free online in PDF form. So that's what I did. I used Bookbinder 3.0, just like I did in my last video, and printed out signatures, which in my case are sections of 8 sheets of paper that are then folded in half all together to make 32 pages in total. And this book, all in all, I think is 700 and some pages long. Here you can see I made a little jig that has tick marks. I'm only using the tick marks that are highlighted in red to let me know where to punch holes through each signature that will be used for sewing later on. Here you can see I'm taking the pages out from under my fancy book press that was used to flatten the pages some. And here I realized I needed to change something about my design, so I had to go back and punch 2 more holes in each signature. So here, this is the most laborious part of the entire process. I am creating a false deckled edge. A real deckled edge is a result of a paper making process from making paper by hand. The edges are soft. This is a false deckled edge that you can create by tearing the edges of the paper against something like a straight edge or something relatively straight. And this took so much longer than I thought it would, because I'm tearing just 1 or 2 strips of paper at a time off of each edge. And remember, there's 16 strips on each edge, so that's 16, 32, 48 strips that I'm tearing off of each signature. It wound up taking me, I'd guess, 5 to 8 minutes per signature to tear the paper. Maybe longer than that, honestly. And I also had to do it over the course of several days, because after an hour or so of tearing paper like that, my fingers started to hurt so bad. And I'm not even really doing it the quote-unquote right way. The right way would be to tear 1 sheet at a time, to tear the edges of 1 individual sheet at a time. I'm tearing 8 sheets at a time. So the end product isn't going to look quite as neat as if I tore 1 sheet at a time, but this saved time, but it was still very labor intensive. So in my last video, some of the feedback I got was wishing that I had shown in more detail the stitching process, and the reason that I didn't do that was because I wasn't really intending it to be a tutorial. It was more of a, look at this thing that I did, proof of concept, you can print your own books. It is possible, I did it. And I figured that if someone wanted to know how to coptic stitch like I did, there's probably better teachers on YouTube than me, who was literally doing it for the first time. But because this stitching process, this whole thing that I'm doing here, is very weird and unconventional. I am trying to spend at least a little bit more time, not necessarily explaining the process, because it's hard to explain, but at least show the video up close enough, hopefully, in enough detail that someone who's at least a little bit familiar with sewing books together will understand what I'm doing here, and maybe be able to replicate the process, if they were so inclined. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm sewing the left side of the book and the right side of the book separately with two separate needles and strands. I just have the right side started already so that I could get an idea of the flow before I tried to record the left to show what the actual process is like to you guys. So essentially what I'm doing is looping from the first hole around the top of the signature, and from the first hole to the second hole there's a French link stitch, and then the third hole is just a regular coptic link stitch. Here I'm running the thread under the last French link stitch that I just sewed, and then returning it to the inside of the first hole of the next signature. Running the thread over the top of the signature and back inside is not a conventional stitching method at all, but I'm doing it here, again, because I want this to look odd and different, but also I'm going to be sewing on, or stitching on, a headband and a tail band. Here you can see I made a very stupid mistake and sewed signatures on out of order, so I had to remove 3 whole signatures, so this is me fixing that now. Now that that's finally done, it's back into the fancy book press. And while it's in there, we'll start work on the cover. So in the last bookbinding video, I used only cheap materials. In this video, I'm using a mix of both, like, good quality materials, like later on you'll see me using actual bookbinder's glue, not Elmer's. But with that being said, I am also cutting out a cereal box right now to use as part of the cover. This here is a paste paper that I made. If you don't know what paste papers are, they were originally, from what I understand, mostly a way of using up leftover paste that you had before it went bad. So you would mix pigments or paints or whatever with the paste and then use it to decorate paper that you would then use for Endpapers or potentially covers or something like that. If you're interested in learning how to make paste papers, I'll provide some links in the description to some better information than what I can give you here. But basically, this is just paste and brown, various shades of brown paint on top of craft with a K, craft paper, that I wound up somehow managing to make look at least a little bit like leather. Here I'm using wheat paste mixed with PVA glue in roughly a 50-50 mix to glue on the part of the covers. I knew because of the way I was doing this, there was a high chance that I would wind up with wrinkles, but I honestly didn't mind if that were to happen because it would add to the, like, weird leather look of the paper. But if you were wanting to avoid any wrinkles in the paper, you'd likely want to either paste the entire thing or at least put paste in the section that you're gluing down and maybe put water on the edges. But because I only had paste in the middle, only the fibers on the paper in the middle are expanding, but the fibers on the outside of the paper aren't expanding, and that's what's causing the wrinkles. So if you just had it uniformly moistened across the entire sheet, you should be able to avoid the wrinkles. Here I'm using something that's similar to bookboard, albeit a lot harder. I honestly probably would have been better off cutting it with a saw rather than making 200 passes with the razor blade trying to cut it. And these boards will have those thinner cereal box boards with the faux leather glued onto them. For the cover, I'm doing something a little bit different, because I don't have a fancy Cricut or a hot foil stamping machine or any kind of hot foil tools, nor experience with any of those things. I traced out a design for the cover on a sheet of paper, and now I'm punching holes through that paper and through the front cover that I'm then going to sew thread through to make the cover art. It's sort of kind of like embroidery. Sort of. You might be wondering why I'm using curved needle for this. I really don't know. I guess that's just what I had out, and I didn't think about it. Probably would have been easier with the straight needle, but literally the entire time I was doing this, did not cross my mind. If you're wondering what totem opus means, it's sort of a very poor translation from Latin that means the complete works of. Like I said, it's not the best translation of that phrase, the complete works of, but it's the one that I thought sounded the coolest, so that's what I went with. Unfortunately, the phone died in the middle of that last recording, and I didn't get to record all of it. but you will get to see it soon. But for now, we're going to be changing gears and working on the spine art. This little image is just something that I found on Google of Cthulhu, obviously, and it looked like something that I might be able to replicate with thread. We'll see. Here I set up a simple little jig for holding the signatures open while I punch holes in the design that I just drew on each signature. It worked okay. I think it would have worked a little bit better if I hadn't been rushing as much as I was during this part, because I did have to go back and clean up some of the holes from the inside when I came back to do my sewing. But again, I think if I had taken my time and been a little bit more careful, it would have been a fairly smooth process. I'm not going to bother to try to explain my process for sewing the art here, because I don't really know that there is a process. Some of the holes are sewn like coptic link stitches, others are sewn past several signatures, some of them are wrapped around strings several times before they go back into a hole. It's just a huge mess. If you want a good tutorial on how to sew like words into a Coptic bound book, I'll provide a link to a Sea Lemon video where she shows how to do just that. But I would not recommend trying to follow what I did here as a tutorial. If you've been wondering how I'm going to attach the covers, that's what we're getting to now. Again, this is all very unconventional, but I'm sewing 2 hemp cords around the Coptic link stitch that I have in the middle, and then I'm sewing another hemp cord around where the headband would be. If you want to call that cord a headband, you can. I'm not sure that it is. And it's from those hemp cords that I will attach the covers. Here's where I do something that changes my course a little bit. I wasn't originally planning on doing this, but if there's any bookbinders watching, they have likely noticed that my spine swell has gotten very out of hand. And if you don't know, spine swell is the thickness that the spine of the book increases from sewing it with thread. And I happen to have so much thread from my weird stitching and also the design that I put into it that the spine swell is just intense. Something you can do to minimize spine swell is to round the spine of the book. That's very commonly done on large cased-in books or, traditional like hardback books. As far as I know, that's never been done on an exposed binding. Not that I've seen, anyway. So, having a rounded spine here, in this case, on an exposed spine, very odd. But like I said, the spine swell was just way too crazy. I had to do something, so I figured I'd give it a shot. This is a PVA bookbinder's glue that I'm using here. So it dries clear and it dries very flexible. That being said, I still don't know how long this will actually hold up, because this is very unconventional. I don't think it's been done. There's probably a reason for that. But so far, the book has been able to hold its shape just from the PVA glue. That's the only thing that's keeping the rounded spine rounded. Hopefully it stays that way for the life of the book. We shall see. A bookbinder in the comments can probably tell me how stupid of an idea this was, and I'd love the feedback. Now that everything's in place and ready to glue up, I'm cutting the hemp strings back to about 1 inch and then taking the awl and feathering out the ends of them so that they glue down a little bit flatter. In retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea for me to sand off the glossy surface of the cereal boxes, and it would have made gluing a little bit easier. It did wind up sticking after a while, but the glue didn't immediately get tacky to the surface like would be ideal. Unfortunately, I made a mistake here and was not careful enough when gluing these boards together. I should have pushed the thicker board back against the spine a little bit harder, because they're not very even at all. Luckily, that's on the back board, so it doesn't show as much, because I'm not sure of a good way to fix it in this case. And here you can see I realized that I didn't trim the excess off the front covers of each board. I should have done that before I glued the first one on, but I'm fixing it after the fact and it worked out fine. So I didn't know if this would work or not, but I needed something to go on the inside of the cover, so I decided to generate some images with AI just to put on the insides of the cover. The images that I generated were bigger on the page that I printed out than I need them to be, so I'm cutting out a template for the size that I need the back of the cover to be in paper. Is it called an in paper? And I'm going to use this guide to figure out which section of the picture I want to cut out to use for the quote-unquote in paper. Now all that's left to do is glue the end papers down. Honestly, I'm not super happy with like the color scheme of the end papers, but I was trying to work with what I had and not spend a bunch of extra money on this project. And I'm decently pleased with the results. I'm not sure if it'll make a difference with this book in particular or not, but generally when you first bind a book, you want to open it in a very specific way, like what I'm doing here. Hold the chunk of the text block and then take just a few pages down at a time. That's supposed to help prevent the spine from creasing in one spot and then it forever creasing in that spot from then on out. Now comes the part of the video where a real YouTuber would have a cinematic cutscene of the thing that they built in thematically appropriate surroundings, but I don't own a single thing that looks culty or otherworldly, so instead you can get a shot of it sitting on my steps, or another shot of it in the grass, or this shot of it in front of my beehive. Or this shot of me holding it open in the middle of a field for some reason. I know what to do. I'll go to the bathroom and turn the lights off and put 2 candles in front of it on the floor. Now that's cinematic right there.